Sydney, Australia's largest city and one of the most beautiful places in the world, is a hub of culture, commerce, and stunning natural beauty. With all of this comes a steep price. Sydney is consistently ranked as one of the most expensive cities globally, leaving many to wonder, why is Sydney so expensive? Today we're going to deep dive into the factors driving these costs and what it means for those who call this city home. First and foremost, let's talk about housing. Sydney's property market is notorious for its sky-high prices. Over the past 2 decades, median house prices have more than tripled. As of 2024, the median house price in Sydney is around 1.5 million Australian dollars, with some suburbs far exceeding that figure. But why such high prices? One word: demand. Sydney is Australia's largest city and one of the most desirable places to live. It's a global city with a strong economy, diverse culture, and world-renowned attractions. People from across Australia and around the world want to live here, and that demand pushes prices up. But demand alone doesn't tell the whole story. On the supply side, several factors limit the availability of housing. First, Sydney is geographically constrained. The city is bordered by the ocean on one side and national parks on the other, leaving little room for expansion. Zoning laws and regulations further restrict the development of high-density housing in many desirable areas. While these regulations are intended to preserve the character of neighborhoods, they also limit the number of homes that can be built, exacerbating the supply shortage. This limited supply combined with high demand creates a perfect storm for rising prices. To put this into perspective, Sydney's housing supply has not kept with pace with population growth. Between 2011 to 2021, Sydney's population grew by over 800,000 people, but the number of new homes built during that time was significantly lower, leading to a housing shortage, which drives up prices. Furthermore, Sydney's property market has become a magnet for investors, both here in Sydney domestically and internationally. Investment properties make up nearly 30% of the housing market in Sydney, and these investors often outbid first-time homebuyers, driving prices even higher. Foreign investment plays a significant role as well. In 2021, foreign buyers accounted for about 10% of the value of all residential property purchased in New South Wales, with the majority of these purchases concentrated in Sydney. This influx of capital, particularly from countries with weaker property rights or unstable economies, has further inflated prices. Now let's move on beyond housing and talk about everyday costs that make Sydney so expensive. From groceries to dining out, transport and utilities, these all add up. Let's start with groceries. Sydney's grocery prices are among the highest in Australia. The reasons for this are multifaceted. First, Sydney's location and infrastructure challenges increase the cost of transporting goods into the city. While Sydney is a major port city, the high cost of real estate affects warehousing and distribution costs. Another factor is the dominance of a very few supermarket chains, Coles and Woolworths, who control over 60% of the grocery market. This duopoly limits competition and gives these retailers significant power to set prices. As a result, Sydney's residents pay more for everyday essentials compared to other cities. To give you some numbers, a basic grocery basket in Sydney can cost up to 15% more than in Melbourne and 25% more than in Brisbane. Compared to international cities, Sydney's grocery prices are about 20% higher than in Berlin and about 10% higher than in New York. Eating out in Sydney is another expensive affair. The average cost of a meal at a mid-range restaurant in Sydney is around 25 to 35 Australian dollars, which is higher than any other Australian cities like Melbourne or Perth. There are several reasons for this. First, the high cost of commercial rent in Sydney's prime locations means that restaurants and cafes need to charge more just to cover their overheads. In some of Sydney's most popular areas like Surrey Hills or the CBD, rent can be as high as 1,500 Australian dollars per square meter per year. Additionally, labour costs in Sydney are among the highest in Australia, with a minimum wage of $21.38 per hour as of 2024. Staffing costs add significantly to the price of dining out. And then there's the cost of ingredients, which, as we mentioned earlier, are already more expensive in Sydney. Transport is another significant cost for Sydneysiders. Sydney's public transport system, while extensive, is one of the most expensive in Australia. The average weekly cost for public transport in Sydney is around $50 to $60, depending on how far you travel. For those who drive, the costs are even higher. Sydney has some of the highest petrol prices in the country, averaging about $1.80 per litre, and that's without considering the cost of parking and tolls. For example, the average cost of parking in Sydney CBD can be up to 30 to 50 Australian dollars per day, and toll roads can add an additional $100 to $150 per week for regular commuters. To put it in perspective, transport costs in Sydney are approximately 20% higher than in Melbourne and 15% higher than in Brisbane. Internationally, Sydney's transport costs are comparable to cities like London, but without the same level of service or infrastructure investment. With all these costs, you might wonder, are wages in Sydney keeping up? The answer is not really. While Sydney's average salaries are higher than in many other parts of Australia, they haven't kept pace with the rising cost of living. Between 2012 and 2022, the average wage in Sydney grew about 2.5% per year. However, during the same period, the cost of living increased by an average of 3.5% per year. And this means that in real terms, Sydney residents are effectively earning less than they were a decade ago. In fact, recent surveys showed that around 30% of Sydney residents spend more than half of their income on housing costs alone, which is well above the affordability benchmark set by housing experts. Another key factor driving up costs in Sydney is globalization. Sydney is a global city, a major financial hub in the Asia-Pacific region, and a gateway to Australia for international business. This status attracts significant foreign investment, not just in property, but in business, infrastructure, and services. The influx of capital has its benefits. It boosts the economy, it creates jobs, and supports Sydney's development as a world-class city. But it also drives up costs, particularly in the real estate market, as we've discussed. But it's not just property. The presence of global businesses in Sydney also drives up the cost of office space, which in turn impacts the costs of goods and services. High commercial rents, particularly in the CBD, are passed on to commuters, contributing to the overall high cost of living. Government policies also play a role in Sydney's high costs. While the government has made efforts to address housing affordability and infrastructure challenges, the impact of these policies has been mixed. On one hand, significant investments in infrastructure like the Sydney Metro and the WestConnex motorway are aimed at improving transport and reducing congestion. However, these projects are incredibly costly, and those costs are often passed on to the public through tolls, higher taxes, or increased public transport fares. Moreover, the pace of infrastructure development often lags behind population growth. As more people move to Sydney, the city's infrastructure struggles to keep up, leading to congestion, large commute times, and ultimately higher costs for everybody. Housing policies have had a significant impact. For example, stamp duty and land tax contribute to the high cost of buying property in Sydney. While there have been discussions about replacing stamp duty with a more equitable property tax, the implementation has been slow, and the benefits have yet to be realized. Additionally, policies aimed at curbing foreign investment into property have had some effect, but they haven't addressed the underlying issue of supply shortages. Without more homes being built, especially affordable housing, prices will continue to rise. So what does the future hold for Sydney? Will it continue to be one of the most expensive cities in the world? Or is there hope for more affordable living? The answer depends on several factors. If Sydney continues to grow without addressing the supply issues in housing, the cost of living will likely remain high. However, there are opportunities to improve affordability. Increasing the supply of affordable housing, particularly in areas with good transport links, is crucial. This includes not just high-density developments, but also more innovative housing solutions. Improving public transport and infrastructure to support growth in outer suburbs can also ease the pressure on housing in the inner city. If people can live further from the city centre without sacrificing their quality of life, it will help distribute the population more evenly and reduce the demand for housing in the most expensive areas. There's a growing recognition that Sydney needs a more balanced approach to development, one that supports sustainable growth while maintaining the city's unique character. This means not only building more homes, but also ensuring that these developments are supported with the necessary infrastructure. Sydney's high cost of living is a complex issue with no single solution. It's driven by a combination of factors: housing supply and demand, everyday living costs, globalization, government policies, and infrastructure challenges. But while the challenges are significant, there are also opportunities for change. By understanding the factors driving Sydney's high cost, we can start to have a more informed conversation about how to make the incredible city more affordable for everyone.